We have seen John take on some misconceptions about Jesus that the people that originally received this letter had. And we need to review those a little bit because some of the things you're going to see during the crucifixion are related to that. He wrote to some people in Asia Minor. In Asia Minor later, there became a full-blown heresy called Gnosticism. The idea that Jesus didn't really come in the flesh. That when he walked, he didn't leave footprints. That he wasn't really there. Because in their mind, in their philosophy, they could not assimilate the idea of God becoming material. Spiritual becoming material. So what you're going to see some things, some details about the crucifixion that John gives in order to undercut that whole thing. The other problem they had is they really wanted to rebuild a religious system. A system that Jesus died to destroy. A system that by this time that they got this letter had been destroyed. Jerusalem was gone. And they were trying to rebuild a system like that, where people could be over other people, where you had to go to somebody else for spiritual things instead of going directly to Jesus. Some of the things you need to think about when you read the details of the crucifixion. So in chapter 19, we're going to start in the second part of verse 16. We'll start in 16. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Okay, wait a minute. What about Joseph? The guy of Arimathea, the guy that carried the cross for Jesus? Did John not know about that detail? There's part of this trip that Jesus carried the cross. Hard to do that if you're not really flesh. Right? If you're not really there. Which is what they would say the reason that this other guy had to carry it, because Jesus really wasn't there. He wasn't flesh. Anyway, John says, okay, he carried it. The place in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. I don't know how many times I quoted that when I was in college. When they were grading my papers and I would say, what I have written. I never quoted that. We talked last week about who sentenced Jesus. And we want to blame the Romans, and the people in Asia Minor definitely wanted to blame the Romans because they were still seething in this Jewish rebellious mode. And we saw from Pilate that, first off, he was impressed with Jesus. Second off, that he was scared. And in this, you get the impression of who he really believes is the King of the Jews. Remember the question, shall I crucify your king? He said, okay, I have written it, it's going to stay there. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. It's a pretty impressive thing, right? It wasn't sewn together at all, it was woven all the way around. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. This happened so that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, they divided my garments among themselves and cast lots for my clothing. So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, do you remember who the disciple is whom he loved? John, our author. John was there. He saw them cast lots for the clothes. He didn't run, he didn't hide, he was there. We saw that he was actually in the high priest's courtyard. So John was there. The disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, "Here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. This explains a couple things. One is why John was late in ministry compared to some of the other apostles. He was taking care of Mary. He didn't do the missionary work at the beginning like they did. Okay? What it doesn't explain, though, is what happened to James, Jude, and the rest of Jesus' brothers. Jesus was concerned about his mother. He didn't say, "Mom, I hope James does a good job taking care of you. And if not, I hope Jude is there to back him up." No, he says, "I want you to consider this man your son. And I want you to consider this woman your mother." And he took her into his home. Now, we're going to talk more about that later. Okay. Later, knowing that it was now completed, that all was now completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on the stalk of a hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he received a drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his life. Now, if Jesus wasn't really on the cross, then he really wouldn't have been thirsty. He wouldn't really have to take a drink in order to have enough saliva in his mouth to say, "It's finished." Strange but important detail that John wants his hearers to understand. It says here, "Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was a special Sabbath. Because the Jews did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down." Crucifixion was an exact science. The Romans had perfected how long they could keep somebody alive on a cross. And I don't know if you know what actually kills a person on a cross. You've probably heard sermons and lessons about this all your life, and I know. But basically, it's asphyxiation. You get to the point that you can't push your body up enough that your lungs can take in breath. And so you die of lack of oxygen. And sometimes that's just fatigue. But if you want to speed the process up, you make it next to impossible for the person to push themselves up so they can take a breath. And you do that by breaking their legs. Now, you could just as easily just kill them. But that didn't get what the Romans wanted to do with crucifixion. They wanted people to see them gasping for that last breath. So, it says here, "So the soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. When they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true." We're talking about John here. John said, "I saw that." He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may have faith. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled, not one of his bones will be broken. And, as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced.